So I just want to say a few things by way of introduction about the background to this weaponizing of anti-Semitism, which has so intensified in recent years that it's now the first response to any statement about Israel's racism or apartheid practices. And this is a deliberate strategy from the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs. So that means that rather than even attempt to defend what Israel is doing, they go on the offensive. And part of it has been, I think, the success of the BDS movement that has provoked this practice. Regarding anti-Semitism, Ali Abunimah of Electronic Intifada puts it really well, I think, when he says that two groups share an interest in erasing the distinction between Israel on the one hand and the Jews individually and collectively on the other. So he says the first are anti-Semites who just want to seize upon Israel's crime to justify bigotry against Jews, and they are not motivated by genuine solidarity with Palestinians. And the second group is Israel and its supporters around the world, who by implicating Jews in Israel's crime want to use Jews and genuine concern about anti-Semitism as a shield for Israel. Now, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs considers the UK and Germany to be its greatest success stories. And I just want to say a bit about the complicity of the UK, because it's important to highlight, I think, the multiple ways in which these processes are actually enacted and how they connect. So obviously the adoption and the ruthless implementation and enforcement of the IHRA definition are one aspect of that, but there are many other strands which I almost come to think of as a sort of mosaic of repression. So in the legislation currently enacted by our government, which includes the Migration and Borders Bill, in which the Home Office will have the right to deport citizens without even giving their reasons, the Police and Crime Bill, which clamps down on the right to protest, criminalizes certain forms of protest, a proposed amendment to the Public Service Pensions Bill, which says that public sector pension funds may not make investment decisions that conflict with the UK's foreign and defence policy. That is a direct attack on BDS. Now, these all have wider implications, of course, for many populations within the UK, but they are particularly inimical to Palestinian rights. And then just one further specific example is that our Secretary of State for Education has declared, following the prescription of the political wing of Hamas as terrorists, has decided to attempt to criminalize the chanting of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." So all of us UK citizens have a duty to protest against this massive undermining of our own civil liberties, as well as their direct impact on the cause of justice for Palestinians. And I think this illustrates really well a point recently made by Ilan Pape and Mustafa Barghouti, when they highlighted the difference between Israel's sole concern with support among political elites and its indifference to civil society, and that this is where Palestine epitomizes something bigger for all of us about the role of elites and the structure of power within Western societies. And finally, I just want to say a few words about why this is a matter not just for all who advocate for justice for Palestine, but why it's of a particular concern to a mental health network. The personal is political and vice versa. So these attacks on the persons of activists and the accusations of anti-Jewish racism that they contain. They are attacks on the integrity of the person. They are racist in their essence because they deny the subjectivity of the past experience of persons, their families, and their communities. And we must not underestimate the emotional toll that they take, as indeed they are intended to. And the other side, as we'll be hearing, is the absolute outflowing of solidarity, and I would say love, that the case of Shahad and others generate. And this is the essential counterbalance to those attacks on the soul that are so deliberately intended to dehumanize Palestinians. Shahad's case is reflective of the strategy of silencing that so many activists endure. So when confronted with our own government's connivance, it must push us further to defy the existing instruments used to maliciously dehumanize Palestinian rights advocates. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers who will be in conversation. First of all, Shahad Abu Salama is a Palestinian academic born and raised in Jabalia refugee camp in the north of Gaza, now based in Sheffield and teaching at the Media Arts and Communication Department at Sheffield Hallam University. She's recently submitted her PhD dissertation. She is an artist, activist, author of Palestine from My Eyes, and co-founder of the London-based Hawiya dance company. And just to add, we were also very privileged to have Shahad present and contribute to our Palestinian Children's Conference in 2019, when no one who attended could possibly forget her eloquence and her testimony. Lama Khoury is a Palestinian psychotherapist who's based in New York, and as well as her private practice, she's a clinical supervisor at the Arab American Family Support Center. And Lama comes to the field of mental health following a 14-year career at the United Nations, most of which she spent as a political affairs officer at the Department of Peace Operations. Lama is one of the founders of the Palestinian Global Mental Health Network and on its steering committee. And from the point of view of us in the UK network, Lama has played an absolutely pivotal role in links between our different networks, especially the USA and the UK groups. And I think we in particular have been inspired by your Lama's wisdom and her creativity. So thank you, and over to you, Lama and Shahad.
Thank you so much, Gwen.
Thank you, Gwen.
Introduction.
Absolutely, I second that, absolutely. And before beginning, I want to acknowledge that I am joining you from New York City, which is part of the unceded land of the Lenape people. I'm mentioning this because Indigenous people are the past, present, and future of the land, whether here or in Palestine. And to just second what Shahd said, Gwen, thank you so much for this introduction and for setting the ground so beautifully. I also want to thank all those who make Café Palestine happen. By the way, my nickname for Café Palestine is Cathartic Palestine. This is the one space where we Palestinians and our supporters can come and speak freely and know it is a safe space where our voices are heard, counted, acknowledged, and acted upon. When Gwen asked for my bio, I wondered if I should take out the fact that I worked for so many years at the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations, which, as Gwen said, is now called the Department of Peace Operations. Perhaps the UN figured it's ridiculous to say peacekeeping when there's no peace to keep. Now, why am I talking about the UN now? I am talking about the UN partly because I am ashamed that I worked there for so many years. I'm also talking about the UN to highlight how, to use Edward Said's words, the Palestinians' permission to narrate is denied on an international scale. If we consider it carefully, there is something uncanny and quite disturbing about the UN. It is this powerful international machinery that is supposed to fight for justice, but often it feels as if it relegates the fight to the marginalized and oppressed. Let me explain my point further. The UN was created, supposedly, and I quote the preamble to the charter here, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, end of quote. As I read these words and think about Palestine, I seriously am not sure if I should laugh or cry. And an international body that claims it has your best interest at heart actually doesn't really care. Notwithstanding the UN's powerful, lofty mandate, its Security Council continues to uphold a tacitly self-serving and racist framework because the Charter of the UN itself ultimately was designed so as not to infringe on the UN Security Council members' interests and regards those interests as somehow aligned with the natural order of things and the interest of the world at large. Hence, any attempt to hold Israel accountable is vetoed, and human rights violations continue to go on unabated. What appears to many of us as a no-brainer is seen by some as a violation of peace or the natural order of things. For example, of course Palestine must be free, and of course from the river to the sea. Why shouldn't we ask for dignity, justice, equality for all Palestinians? To quote my much admired and loved colleague and friend, Dr. Nadira Shalhoub Kabarkian, being Palestinian is about the fight for justice, against dispossession, for togetherness, for home against homelessness, for the right to refusal, for livability and life against debilitation and death. The silencing and discrimination we Palestinians and our supporters experience are blatant, rampant, and brutal. In the past few weeks, as I was reading about what Shahd was going through, I was reminded of something I had written a couple of years ago. I wrote about a dream I had where my 4-year-old son, who is 20 now, was buried neck deep in the middle of a neighborhood and surrounded by modest houses. Passers-by would kick his face, but he remained silent, as if the kicks were part of life and not to be contested, as if to survive he needed to keep his mouth shut. Of late, my son in the dream has become the Palestinian people. You either capitulate or we will continue to beat you to the ground. Our struggle for freedom is framed and treated as terrorism. Our children's refusal and resistance, even with throwing rocks available in their neighborhoods, are faced with wounding, arrest, and/or killing. Many young adults who are faced with the no-hope structure of dispossession are struggling to create life amidst the death zones within which they live. Parents and families in Gaza are doing all they can to help their children escape the largest open-air prison on earth, knowing that they may never see their children again. If you have children, think about this for a minute. But don't let this grim picture discourage you. Shahd's life, her art, writing, dance, and many other achievements are a testimony of the formidable agency, love, life, and power of the Palestinians. We survived 74 years of an unending catastrophe. Outside Palestine, we helped build nations, developed economies, and changed worlds. In Palestine itself, we continue to live and fight for freedom, although confronted daily by the most powerful army and the only nuclear power in the region that is supported by the only superpower on the planet. Things are changing. Increasingly, more individuals are recognizing the Palestinians' mistreatment and abuse and are speaking out. I believe a critical mass of supporters of Palestine is beginning to coalesce and will eventually reach a tipping point. The trajectory of the Palestinians' path will continue to change. However, with this change and the success the Palestinian liberation movement has been gaining the past years, the viciousness of the Zionist machinery and supporters of the Israeli racist state is on steroids, as Nadia Abul-Hajj stated not too long ago. Consequently, we see abuse, smearing campaigns, and harassments of those who speak out and are particularly successful, as is the case of Shahd Abu Salama. And now I will turn to you, Shahd. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to join us today. I know you have been on the go for weeks, and I know that your commitment does not waver. I probably will ask you questions that you have answered so many times already, so please bear with me. So my first question is, if you could share with us, I mean, I'm sure many people have been following you and know already, but tell us where, about what's been happening the past few weeks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, like your reflections, I have to first recognize that I'm so moved by this show of solidarity, by generations of the Palestinians already being represented on one screen in so many different places. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see this, and it gives me so much power. And of course, I know that I'm not fighting it all.
Shahd, you're muted. You're muted.
I think someone muted me.
Maybe by mistake.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a Zionist conspiracy.
Possible. It's possible.
So yeah. So actually, I'm back to teaching now, and yesterday was my 4th time meeting the students. But this has, I call it a nightmare, to be honest. But there was actually a lot of positives to take out of it. But the nightmare started actually on Christmas Eve. And if you remember, on that eve, we received the news that the Archbishop, I can't talk. It's just because every time I talk about it, I really have I feel like I'm experiencing it again. And I guess in a Palestine mental health talk, we should be able to understand these things and how really we do relive this experience as if it just happened. And in my case, actually, when I'm asked this question, I don't only think of the suspension and the investigations that had started and I learned about from the Zionist press, namely Jewish news. When I learned that I was being investigated. So that started on Christmas Eve. And I was actually mourning the loss, as all of you were, the loss of an icon that has driven our motivation and our faith in humanity and social justice for all. And then Jewish News tells me basically that my university is investigating my social media posts over unfounded claims of anti-Semitism. And actually, the tweet thread that they used against me then is something that I was very proud of. You know, I was actually standing on the side of a Palestinian first-year student who was being criminalized at the University of Sheffield because she made a placard reading "Stop the Palestinian Holocaust." And from a perspective of Palestinian, to use this, I mean, she's definitely thinking about the ethnic cleansing campaign that the Palestinians have suffered in 1948 and have suffered continuously ever since. And we see it now in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, in the Jordan Valley, in all these places. And there is like, so that student was being accused of anti-Semitism and was going to undergo a disciplinary procedure because of that. And as a Zionist had complained that using Holocaust in that context is anti-Semitic. And of course, like, we're not here to speak about like this, but there is a ground here to actually refute that and be like, no, this is malicious, and this is an attempt to sort of deflect from the Palestinian suffering and these long-standing injustices that have been committed against the Palestinians. They keep wanting to corner us in the defensive, as Gwen said, and we refuse to do that. We shouldn't be silenced, and we shouldn't let them decide for us the sort of words that we use to describe the experiences that we've lived, the terror that we've lived through, and survived one generation after the other. And we should be speaking about this, and the world should be listening, not trying to silence us. And so I received that news on Christmas Eve, and then the university went on holiday, and everyone went on holiday. Jewish News also went on holiday. And I kept like dealing with this as I'm also trying to finish writing up my PhD, which I submitted on New Year's Eve. The same day, the campaign against anti-Semitism then joined in line in the attack. And we should here speak about the forces of Zionism and how, like, for example, this campaign against anti-Semitism is led by people who are also leading the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, that has been leading settler colonialism in Palestine since the early 20th century. And these people are still working right now in Al-Araqib, in so many places, building British parks on top of ethnically cleansed lands. And Palestinian families are being affected by this in their thousands and tens of thousands. And these people are hiding behind anti-Semitism because they cannot defend the crimes that we are exposing. And for the university to capitulate to Zionist pressure and manipulation, taking my words out of context and completely dismissing me and dismissing my perspective and giving me a right to response. It's just absolutely outrageous. And we live in an academic community that claims to be anti-racist and to be supportive of decolonization. And I mean, like now, decolonizing the curriculum, for example, is a trend in British Academy and US Academy. And when it comes, however, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to people actually doing the decolonizing work, the decolonizing research, they are silenced. And this is outrageous and cannot be accepted. So it is thanks to this fight back that you guys all joined in, that we managed to reverse the Zionist attempt to silence Palestine and make it backfire against them and actually expose them and expose the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism as a political tool designed to deflect attention from Israeli crimes and protect Israel from accountability. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shad, for all this insight, very important insight. And thank you for being here. I can't imagine how hard it is. And you've been just amazing, your strength and steadfastness. You know, one thing you said that I think is very important is, and is worth emphasizing again, is if you're successful, you're going to get attacked. And it's not the first time you're attacked.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking about 2019.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd like to talk about.
So
and maybe
yeah,
I can play the video if you want.
The Palestinians in general, the Palestinians are used to like practices of suppression, and we know that at worst we are killed, at best we are demonized or detained, and examples of suppression are plenty in the course of the Palestinian struggle. I mean, people like Ghassan Kanafani, he was fighting with his pen, he was fighting with his voice, and he was chased beyond the occupied territories into Lebanon and killed in cold blood with his niece, 17-year-old Lamis. And unlike these examples, Darine Tatour, beautiful Palestinian woman who just dared to write a poem and post it on Facebook saying, "Resist, my people, resist." And the right to resist is a right for any colonized people. And no one can take that right from us. If we are resisting occupation, and of course we're gonna resist that. And anyone in our position would resist a colonial power that is trying to exist at the expense of their erasure and elimination and suffocation. And this is what Israel is doing. And I forgot to say about 2019. So then as well, the Jewish Chronicle had led that malicious campaign against me that is now being revived. And although I had dealt with it, and I have written about it, I have written a response on Jadaliya. You can all go and read it. It's called Protesting Israel's Demonization and Dehumanization of the Palestinians. And I have written in length about how I came under attack. Of course, I was one of the faces of Boycott Eurovision campaign when Israel was about to host Eurovision on Al-Manshiyah, an ethnically cleansed village a few kilometers away from where Palestinians were alongside the separating fence with Israel, in their tens of thousands, just calling for their right to return to their dispossessed lands, and the Great March of Return being shot in front of world's cameras, shot dead indiscriminately. And that was like quite disturbing for me. And of course I was gonna fight that normalization and that art washing of Israeli crimes. And as an artist, I feel that this is a duty for everyone, for any person who's a human, not just, of course. And that was my way of sort of like exposing the hypocrisy of art washing Israeli crimes in the context of Eurovision. And then an attorney who claims to be the only Jewish attorney in Vienna writes to my university, to the heads of department, and says and asks them to discipline me, and using the worst racist language, like written, it's all there, like the evidence is there. And that person thinks that he's privileged, like, of course, like he comes with a sense of privilege, that he thinks he's allowed to sort of attack a young Palestinian woman, a refugee in this country, and speak about her in that way, just because I dared to write an article exposing how the IHRA is a tool that is used to protect Israeli apartheid. That was an article I wrote on Al Jazeera in 2018. It was called "The IHRA Will Not Protect Israeli Apartheid." And I was then thinking, I was making the parallels between South Africa apartheid and Israeli apartheid, and how at that time Theresa May was going back to, was visiting South Africa, and she went to the island where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 29 years. And of course, let's not forget that Theresa May's party has called Nelson Mandela a terrorist and was part of the demonization of the Black struggle in South Africa. And she was asked there in a very powerful video by a Black journalist, who asked her, "What did you do to end South Africa apartheid?" And of course, Theresa May had nothing to say in response. And this is what the people who are staying silent or so-called neutral, when it comes to such clear cases of injustice, they will be asked at some point, what have they done to challenge racism? What have they done to stop people being killed and being mass incarcerated just because of their identity or religion or whatever? What have they done to stop Israeli apartheid? They will be coming to accountability, even if, and unfortunately, my university has been feeding into these campaigns, into these smears, because they don't want to be called anti-Semitic. They don't want to be called anti-Semitic, but then they literally fuel racism against the victims of racism.
Shad, maybe you could describe to the group what happened when your students, I don't know if they were all your students, maybe there were more, went to the meeting with the Vice Chancellor.
Oh, right. Yeah, I heard about this action that students made at Sheffield Hallam University, there was a question and answer session with the Vice Chancellor, Chris Husbands, and the students asked him, why did you suspend Shahid Abu Salama? And he then said that the university has done the right decision and all that. As far as I understood, that he sort of acknowledged that my reinstation is a correct decision. But however, he denied that I was suspended. And I'm like, so what have exactly happened? If that is not suspension, it is de facto suspension. It was a de facto suspension. I was about to meet my students for the second time, and just hours before, I'm told that there was a complaint handed in, an investigation is being carried on, and the classes will be cancelled until further notice. And in the same time, my students are emailed that the classes are cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. And what is this if this is not suspension? I felt like I was punished. I was silenced. And my way of reclaiming my voice was to talk about what is happening. The university ignored any protocols or any of its duties of care to its own students and staff members. And yes, they corrected their behavior and reinstated me and even gave me a better contract to Israel's anger and dissatisfaction. But this shouldn't mean that, like, what happened shouldn't have happened to start with, basically.
Yeah. You know, I've been like, in my mind, I've been operating on this, I don't know what to call it, but belief maybe that it's your successes. You know, I'd love to share with the group your Madonna video, if you allow me, and many other successes, your blog, the dance group you started with, you know, you co-created, the closing of the drone factory in Oldham, I think it was. I mean, all these successes. I wonder if you weren't powerful and making a difference, I don't know if they would care, you know. And
I think grassroots work is very important. Our grassroots work is really, really important, and we are learning and mobilizing a lot more effectively, and with our campaigns, we are getting smarter and hitting Israel where it hurts most, its reputation and its economy. And when we are, for example, with Eurovision campaign, with the Boycott Eurovision campaign, like, yes, Eurovision may have went ahead, but as I said, those Israel's reputation was severely damaged and exposed. And all those who participated in that normalizing glamour are also going to be questioned one time about their participation and complicity in Israeli apartheid, in contravention of the occupied people's call upon them to boycott in solidarity. And with Oldham, I'm very proud to be like one of the let's say galvanizing voices when it comes to Shut Elbit Down campaign. And I'm very proud of the people who are daring to put their liberty on the line and ride the roofs of arms factories that are literally battle testing, they say. They're battle testing their weapons. And they battle tested on Gaza, on the children majority population of Gaza. a mass incarcerated population that cannot even escape by swimming for it. We are besieged from land, sea, and air. And Elbit systems, they literally experiment their weapons and then come and join world's arms fairs where they market it as battle tested, and then they sell it to regimes such as India so they can use it against their unwanted others, India and Saudi Arabia. And it's just horrible. It's horrible. I mean, I truly believe that Israel is contributing to a moral decay that is threatening us and threatening racialized communities wherever they exist. And we know, for example, that the police brutality and racism in the US is benefiting from the military exchange with the Israeli military and defense forces. So they do exchange money and expertise, and of course the police, they are imperial powers, and the US has been one of the main sponsors since 1945 of the Israeli project. So our political effectiveness, I guess, I truly believe that it is our political effectiveness that is hitting Israel and exposing it, is what is making Israel so desperate that they come after people like me, victims of their ethnic cleansing and their crimes.
I mean, they thought you were an easy target, but you didn't. You ended up being not an easy target at all. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Of course, I'm not gonna give up easily. Of course, I wouldn't. I'm not gonna give up. And I know that if they didn't come for me, they would have come for another Palestinian. And I'm fighting not just for me, but also for everybody who may come in this position. And if I stayed silent, they will continue chasing me. And of course, I'm not going to let Israel and its apologists decide my future and the future of the Palestinian young generation and anyone who dares to speak in our support. I found my future at stake, my life at stake, and then I'm being demonized, and the actual oppressors are being portrayed as the victims. The twisting and the manipulation of the whole situation is just unimaginable, and it's so disturbing. It's so disturbing. It is the occupied that has the right to resist, and our occupier, we are going to resist our occupier, not just because they are Jews, but because they are occupying us, ethnically cleansing us, existing at the expense of our elimination. And we have seen settlers in their hundreds invading Palestinian towns and villages. Just recently in Sheikh Jarrah, hundreds of them, and they were chanting in the loudest possible. They were chanting to Arabs. And racism, like in bright daylight, that is being practiced day in, day out, and we wake up to it every day, and the world is not doing anything. The young people are trying to reverse this international failure to serve justice to the Palestinians.
Shad, you know, I want to ask you, I mean, all this stress, how have you been managing it? You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to.
No, I've
I
been all
know
right.
you
I'm
come.
holding up, and
Mm,
I'm very empowered by the people's
mm,
response and everyone here. I mean, like, you know, what I'm dealing with is nothing in comparison to, for example, my father, who spent 15 years of captive resistance in Israeli jails.
mm,
And he came out victorious and dignified despite them.
mhm,
And he was never broken, and he never showed any sort of
mhm,
regret for the struggles that he had to endure.
mhm,
And we know, we
mhm,
believe that freedom is not going to come on a golden plate. We need to strip it,
mhm.
and we need to act as if we can radically change the world, to use
So important. Yeah.
Angela Davis.
Mhm,
We need to act as if we believe we can. We absolutely can change the world,
mhm,
and we have to be that change.
mhm. I wonder if you feel, can I share with our audience the Madonna video?
Of course,
Is
yeah.
this, yes? Okay, so I'm gonna do
You're
that.
gonna laugh a bit, so it's
No,
good.
it's wonderful, wonderful. Another form of resistance. I hope it works. Where am I here? Sorry. Oh, there.
Donna, I know you're going to be annoyed, 'cause your vision's keeping you employed. But you should know by now about the BS movement. Always thought that you knew right from wrong. Palestinians ask for help to carry on. They may be occupied, but they're struggling for freedom. Israel's been flouting international law, and human rights are trampled on the floor. Just like South Africa, time to boycott apartheid. So please, Madonna, don't go to your own vision. Madonna, don't go, make the right decision. It's time to change your mind and boycott apartheid. You gotta boycott apartheid. No freedom and no equality, and the law's discriminatory. No, it just ain't right. It's the crime of apartheid. Now Palestinians ask for solidarity. Boycott, divert, sanction until they are free. Madonna, let us give you some good advice. Please, Madonna, don't go to your own vision. Madonna, don't go, make the right decision. It's time to change your mind and boycott apartheid. You gotta boycott apartheid.
Yeah, I don't know what is wrong, but you could find it on YouTube. Something
It was the record. Sorry, is it mine? Ah, something went wrong. Sorry. Ah. Okay. The recording, the sound wasn't going well. Wasn't good. Was the sound
the
okay?
the video was like not working
Oh,
as smoothly as it should.
oh.
But
Yeah,
that's
Was still
okay.
pretty
That's
good, I think.
So powerful. And you know what? I'll share there are two articles you mentioned. I'll put them in the chat. I have them. And was there a backlash for the video? Because it was very effective, wasn't it? Do you want to talk more
Yeah,
about
of
the
course. Like
video?
there was this one and another one as well that was like a parody of one of the most famous Eurovision songs, "So Make Your Minds Up." And
Oh, yeah.
that was another really good one, and both of them can be found. But it's interesting, like the amount of censorship that we find wherever we go. Like even those harmless videos were under censorship. They were censored by YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. Some of them were completely deleted, and some other people just like brought them back. Yeah, some versions remain, and some versions are just completely deleted by
Mm-hmm.
our big brothers.
Incredible.
So
Yeah.
that's when the first smear campaign happened, and Israel, basically the Israeli supporters, went and dug into my tweets to find something that they could flag as anti-Semitic and silence me. And it just like you could see like how malicious it is. It's so clear for anyone who wants to see. And I have written about it, as I said, on Jadaliya. And I even recognized, I recognized that the unintended offense that was contained in one single tweet that I wrote in 2012. But even in that tweet, I used the qualification Zionist Jews, which is something that the Zionists don't actually do, because they want to cement that analogy between Zionism and Judaism in order to protect Israel's interests. Yeah.
I'm gonna put the Jadaliya, excellent Jadaliya article right here. I just posted it in the chat. I have so many questions. I want to say something. I have so much to say. So much to say. Well, I mean, I don't know if people know, like the silencing inside Palestine. If you post something on Facebook, like for example, what Shahd mentioned, resist, people resist. The punishment depends on how many likes you got. So they arrest you, and it depends. If you have too many likes, you're in deep trouble, And even for us who are outside, we live in fear all the time. I mean, I'm often wondering, oh, am I going to end up on Canary Mission? Am I going to be kicked out? Will I lose my kids? Shahd and I spoke yesterday, and she was describing to me how in the UK, maybe you could talk about it, Shahd. And I know we should really move on to our next speakers, but I think it's very important how in the UK they're debating whether they should, if you're like second generation British, you could be kicked out for something. Can you describe a little bit?
Exactly. I mean, like, unfortunately, we have a very conservative person in the state of secretary department at the Home Office, and she's trying to pass some bills that would basically make us even more vulnerable, make refugees and people who with like foreign birth or parents with foreign birth even more vulnerable in this migration system. And of course we need to understand that terrorism here is an ideological weapon used to justify the powerful, but then criminalize the powerless. And these things have been spoken about by so many scholars. I mean, Edward Said has written about this all his life, and exposed how this how terrorism, the word as a word, is like used as as an ideological weapon, and and unfortunately now I am being, you know, demonized and portrayed as a terrorist, like blatantly. I'm a daughter of a convicted terrorist, basically. My father is, they call him like that, and it's just, you know, it's outrageous, and of course it makes my blood boil, that they would dare to turn a freedom fighter into a terrorist, the same way they did to Nelson Mandela. But Nelson Mandela, yes, he was once deemed a terrorist, but he left victorious, and he was a freedom fighter. He was a hero, and our freedom fighters, if they're not recognized now, they will be recognized at some point, and we will make sure that they are recognized as freedom fighters. Yeah, I forgot, Lama, what I was going to talk about. It's just so
well, you know, maybe I could ask you, you know, well, first of all, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I can't thank you enough. You have no idea how much, you know, how much you mean to me.
Thank you so much.
But I don't want, you know, it's easy for me to say many things sitting here, you know, I'm not in your shoes, but I'm so proud to be in your presence. And one thing I want to ask you is, what would you tell the rest of us who want, you know, who would love to turn outrage to action? What would you tell us all?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys are doing great things, and I mean, like I see amongst you so many examples. Like it makes me shy standing here, and you know, I'm only 30, but some of you have been working for Palestine for longer than I've been alive, and that, you know, gives me perspective and keeps me grounded, and keeps me going on, because like we are part of an accumulative struggle. And this is what my father always repeated to us. We are part of this accumulative struggle, and we are going to celebrate the fruits of this struggle one day. I felt it so strongly, to be honest, early January, when I was in front of Elbit Systems, that shut down. And I was like amongst hundreds of people that came to mark the event, and people who were part of that community in Oldham, because they were actually at the forefront of these mobilizations, and they have been, you know, at it, challenging it for like more than 5 years. And of course, Palestine Action came, and like it was the tipping point in that action, and eventually Elbit Systems couldn't sustain, and they couldn't stay and claim to be a normal factory sitting so close near people's homes and schools, while they're literally building weapons to kill Palestinians and Kashmiris. And interestingly, the people of Oldham were mostly Kashmiris, and they were outraged. They were outraged that such an arms factory exists so close to their homes and schools, as if they're normal. How could that be normalized? And they know better than anyone what it is like to be at the receiving end of this oppression. And so like the reason, the way to counter this oppression that is infiltrating so many institutions, and a chain of complicity, really, that we see everywhere. We see when we go to supermarkets, we see when we go to banks, you know, we see everywhere. We see when we open our TV channels and listen to the news, what is said and what remains unsaid. And all that is very important to address. It's very important to hit that chain of complicity and be united in the face of oppression. And I think my case showed, it was a brilliant demonstration of what we can do when we are united as one voice against oppression.
Thank you so much, Shad. You know, there are so many questions for you coming in the chat, but before going there, I want to call on Omar. He's with us now. And he will introduce himself. Omar, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Lama. Thank you. My name is Omar Shweki. I'm a British Palestinian, long time activist in this country. Currently the director of Friends of Birzeit University, although today I'm speaking in a personal capacity, but first of all, I just wanted to say, of course, it's a privilege to be amongst so many amazing people here today. Thank you, Gwyn, for the kind invitation to speak. It's a real honor, like Shahid said. It's very humbling to be amongst people who have spent so much energy and time over many years supporting the Palestinian struggle. And I have to say, if I begin, I found it very moving hearing Shahid, hearing everyone who's spoken, and feeling this incredible sense of strength and collective support, and use the word that Gwyn used at the beginning, love. You know, it's very empowering, as Shahid said. And I think there's a real strong, if there's one lesson to be taken away today, it's that the strength of that love and solidarity is really both healing and galvanizing and mobilizing. I was asked to share some personal reflections on being engaged in work for Palestine in the UK as a British Palestinian. So I'm just going to share some personal reflections. I speak only for myself, and so I grew up in this country, and as I recommend for those who haven't seen it, Akram Salhab's video is on Channel 4, was a fantastic depiction of the experience of British Palestinians in the UK growing up. And it was a really moving moment when it was shown, because I'd never really seen on UK TV all the years I've been living in the UK. I've never really seen or heard our voice in such a clear and eloquent way on mainstream UK news. Not talking about us, but speaking for ourselves. And my experience of growing up here was very much a sense of alienation, growing up being taught history at school. Who would know that Palestine was a British colony? I mean, I certainly wouldn't have learned that from the history books I was taught. And a sense of being, as a Palestinian, a lot of shame, internalized shame. My father used to say, he had a lot of fear. He had many bad experiences himself, but he used to say, if anyone asks, just tell them you're Jordanian, which is a classic thing that many young Palestinians will experience, not just in Britain, but all over the world. I should say that he would also have a lot of pride he shared with me as well, which I'm grateful for too. But I always had that sense of needing to demonstrate I was peaceful, I was civilized, I was not interested in violence, that I was rational, that I was calm, collected, always polite, and particularly respectable before I even spoke about anything about my experience. And I didn't really become conscious of that weight until much later. And that was tied to a lot of feelings of fear about speaking about Palestine. I think, I'm amongst therapists, so I don't want to do too much analysis on your behalf, but, I think I learned a lot about myself through the gaze of other people here in the UK, and as soon as the word Palestine was uttered, you know, it wasn't always you didn't always receive a condemnatory response, but there was often a look of suspicion of that you were starting something controversial, and I think I carried that and have carried that a lot. When I arrived at university in Oxford in 2004, you know, it was a very hostile environment, and it stays with me this first memory at the Oxford Union, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, is a very prestigious debating chamber. I didn't come from a usual Oxford background, so already I was kind of feeling quite alien in the place. But I went along to a Palestine debate. In fact, Avi, you were giving it. You were taking part in it at the time. So I went along to see Avi and this Palestine debate, and each at these debates there's usually a chance for members of the audience to contribute to the debate, and they can give what they call a floor speech, and then a prize is awarded to the best floor speech. And it was clear that the momentum was with the Palestine side of the debate, but then this very plucky young student got up and declared in front of everyone his defiance and his pride at being a Zionist. And I remember very vividly my heart stopping at that moment, because I could see he was claiming the mantle of victimhood and resistance against this oppressive pro-Palestinian audience, and he won rapturous applause, and then he won the prize for the best speech. And I remember this was my first week at university, and I thought, oh my God, the notion that someone would be proud and then receive this kind of response for their support of Zionism, I couldn't fathom. But so I felt very isolated. My experience was, though, joining the Palestine Society and the Arab Society at the university, we also encountered hostility sometimes with other solidarity activists who felt that we couldn't talk about certain things to do with Palestine. You know, you could talk about the occupied territories, but you couldn't talk about refugees. You could talk about settlements, but you couldn't talk about Palestinians living in Israel, or the right of return, for instance. And so we had some hostility there. But at university, I found an amazing community of mostly Arabs and Palestinians from all over the world who had grown up in Palestine, as refugees in Lebanon and Jordan, Arab brothers and sisters from other Arab countries. And, you know, I had a profound experience at university. I not only did I learn more about our history, the history of injustices that we've experienced as a people, but I also learned about the amazing progressive history of struggle, an incredibly inspiring, rich tradition of resistance, an emancipatory struggle that is almost more buried than the injustices that have been suffered by the Palestinian people. And this was incredible. It really began to heal this sense of alienation. It was a community I felt I belonged to, and it gave me a tremendous sense of hope. And together as a community, we began organizing, and we were privileged to say I was able to help organize with the early Israeli apartheid weeks. And at the time, we faced many obstacles when we organized. You know, of course, there were room booking cancellations. There were accusations that sought to malign us collectively and individually, our reputations, and all the time the fear hanging over us that we would be jeopardizing our education, our potential careers, all this kind of stuff. And many Palestinians, and understandably, decided not to take part in that kind of activity. And who could blame them? We've seen the impact, the response that many have received. And so there's a tremendous sense of fear. What I'd like to end on, though, is maybe a hopeful note, which I feel is the spirit of this occasion, because we encountered many obstacles. But when I was at university organizing, and subsequently, I also discovered the tools to overcome those obstacles. Some of the tools that we learned, that I learned to pick up, are certain ways of working, which are always careful. It's always in the service of the cause. It's all about the collective good and not about specific individual agendas. It's always about showing, which is our duty, to show the inspiration that our people give us, their struggle, which is a universal struggle for justice. You know, sometimes it's tempting to exclusively focus on the crimes and the suffering of our people, but it's also important to demonstrate their determined resistance, the hope they always provide us with, that rich tradition of struggle, which didn't start yesterday, and it didn't start even, dare I say it, with the BDS movement. It started many years ago with generations before us, that not only inspired whole people in Palestine, but also inspired the world, and was very integral to this anti-racist and anti-colonial struggles of the modern era. That history is silenced, and it's not a coincidence that it is. It's because it is a history that is a treasure that will that gives strength to us today. And finally, of course, the tool, which I don't need to talk about too much here because everyone already knows it very well. It's the tool of solidarity. It was about reaching out for the support of friends, because of course, as Shahad said, you know, it's only the Palestinian people who can free themselves, but we cannot do it alone. And every people seeking their freedom has always relied upon the support and the solidarity of their friends. And it was without that support, without that encouragement, without that solidarity, and without, as Gwen so beautifully put it at the beginning, love of others, I think we wouldn't be in the strength, have the strength and position that we have today. So thank you, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Omar. So well said. I have so much to say.
Just before you could, sorry, just before you continue, Lama, I just want to say we want to hear Heba, and then we do have some questions. So I'm going to suggest that we carry on until 5:45, if that's okay with everybody, so that we get a chance to hear Heba and then have the questions.
Of course, yes. So Heba Zarifi is a Jungian psychoanalyst, and she's based in the UK, and she will share some personal reflections.
Thank you, Lama. Well, it is very moving to hear Shahad and Omar's testimonies. And I would like to express, along with all of us present here today, both solidarity and support to Shahad and Omar for their sumud, Arabic for steadfastness. With courage, they denounced a series of smear campaigns aimed at tarnishing their reputations to discredit not only their work, but their identities as Palestinians. In contrast to an image in the final passage of Melville's Moby Dick, it seems timely to assert that Palestinians will not give in or give up the spear of struggle. We are bound by our honor, if not by destiny, to choose to live as free people, free from the shackles of injustice, despite designers' propaganda, spreading chilling fears and witch-hunting campaigns. Debunking the workings of fundamentalist Zionism and its web of tormenting attacks on anyone who denounces its intentions is a fight whose aim is not the destruction of the other, but a quest for freedom and a desire to live in peace with justice. Death by deed or by word, as exacted by the colonizer on the colonized, is an assassination of sorts. Yet Palestinians shall not cease from reclaiming the right to narrate, by deed and by word, their stories as a testimony to their denied history. Our poetry is not that of silence only. It is of the many voices crying louder than loud to articulate the pieces of our broken lives. We piece together our fragmented parts in silence and in words, weaving our past with our present, whilst imagining our future as a living reality in our homeland. Thank you, Gwen and the network, for your invitation, asking me to offer some personal reflections as a contribution to today's cafe, albeit with somewhat a lengthy introduction. To Lama for holding the space for many among us who battle at the front line to testify in communitas about the many personal struggles Palestinians face, often behind the screen. Nationally or internationally, whether in the public sphere or in isolation, whenever Palestinians embody their Palestinian identity or narrate their history from their subjective, authentic, and unique standpoint, and even when under the umbrella of the so-called diversity and otherness talks, they are met with unbelievable hatred and racial discrimination. We cannot remain silent, and we cannot be silenced, says Amnesty International Chief Agnès Calamard. Name-calling against those who challenge the Israeli state violence and its militaristic colonial apartheid regime is a classic ploy to slam informed critique of the state that has come to be known as Israel. Amnesty's 280-page report on Israel's apartheid system recognizes that since its inception in 1948, Israel has in fact constituted a cruel system of domination and crime against humanity. International organizations, as well as Israeli human rights groups, will not give in to name-calling, nor will the voices of Palestinians clinicians, academics, historians, artists, and those in the wide spectrum of professions who denounce the injustices of segregation, occupation, and criminality be muted. The indisputable rights of Palestinians denied by the powers that be must be met with the hammering of evidence of the injustices, inscribed as they are in discriminatory laws and in cruel practices over every aspect of the indigenous Palestinians' livelihoods, from birth to death and even beyond. Palestinian activists and human rights organizations have recognized the state of Israel as an apartheid state for decades. We hope that this latest report will embolden politicians and governments to similarly step forth and call out Israel's apartheid states from the river to the sea, as Miko Peled recently wrote in his newsletter. To attain effective transformative outcomes, Palestinians need more than ever the support of solidarity movements to push back against heinous attacks, such as those experienced by Shahad and Omar and the many Palestinians who remain silent on the periphery of public speech. The reinstatement of Shahad to her post at the university is perhaps an unprecedented achievement in the European context, one that truly calls for celebration. We also wish to celebrate the active contribution of supporters, including from several Jewish solidarity groups and individuals whose support points out that a pathway forward opens when we stand in solidarity even with one another. Solidarity is relational. It abides by a moral obligation for mutual support. Solidarity goes beyond ethno-religious or social divisions. It recognizes that a harm done to one is a harm done to all. There is no other path toward human solidarity except the quest for and the respect of individual dignity, as Pierre Lecomte de Neuilly says in his book, Man and His Destiny, L'Homme et sa Destinée. This is where true alliances are vital in making a difference and pressing on effective change. But who are the allies? And when does allyship swing to its opposing polarity and betray rather than support? Allyship and solidarity are particularly and understandably fraught. They mean different things to different people. Yet communication, cooperation, and fluidity in solidarity are the driving forces or healthy instincts as impulses to carry out actions from necessity, as Jung writes, gradually coalescing into transnational solidarity movements around the Palestinian struggle for freedom. I am, alas, reminded of some words of Eldridge Cleaver, the late Black Panther Party leader. There is no more neutrality in the world. You either have to be part of the solution or you're going to be part of the problem. Oppressed people will see structural racism shifting only if and when there is a collective pushback against it. The marginalized need to have their voice amplified and centered around them, again, not to compete with them, but to enhance their rightful place. A successful partnership in solidarity is conducive to the unfolding of a middle ground, the third way, or in the in-betweenness, neither colluding nor abandoning, neither identifying with the extent of owning the struggle as though it is one's own, nor betraying it opportunistically, but rather moving away from performative gesture to constructive action. Allyship can easily separate itself from the structural problems it wishes to address and veer into benefiting from the struggle, often in seemingly laudable ways. Decentering Palestinian voices and taking center stage to stand not beside them, but instead of them, is a reenactment of the Balfour promises to create a homeland for the Jews, not in Palestine, but instead of Palestine. Betrayal is the shadow brother of the ally, as seen in history across the Middle East. This must be made conscious when allies choose to support Palestinians in their struggle. They may run the risk of adopting the cause, but sidelining the people. In summary, solidarity acts on the awareness of the moral obligation to address and confront issues of injustice as experienced by the oppressed. Its strivings are not personal, but with humility, initiated toward effective transformative outcomes. To quote Shahid from her interview with Mondoweiss, popular pressure works, and if we fight back, we can win, she asserts, because all of this outpouring of support that came from all corners of the world, multi-international, multi-faith, multi-racial supporters, was a key player in the struggle for Palestine. She adds, we have to remember that we have justice on our side. UN resolutions, international law, and all international conventions, the International Court of Justice is on our side. Even Israeli human rights organizations are on our side. Effectively, the outpouring of support for Shahid on social media platforms stands in contradistinction to the workings of the Zionist lobby, which relies on intimidation and silencing campaigns. Weaponizing the IHRA definition, which is ambiguous enough to suit Israel's political strategy of supremacy, is one tactic which should come under scrutiny. For many, this definition rings like a déjà vu, a reminder of the Balfour Declaration's ambiguous wording that baffles and hides more than it reveals, to provide enough leeway to make it applicable, even when non-applicable. Jeffrey Robertson, QC, has warned there is a particular danger that the IHRA definition will be used mistakenly to defame criticisms of Israel by branding them as anti-Semitic. Is critiquing the exclusionary racism of the Jewish for Jews only state of Israel anti-Semitic? Is maintaining the policies of the state as an unquestionable, beyond reproach, stainless, immaculately conceived endeavor any support to its Semitic character? How does this notion reconcile with the writings of renowned academics who denounced racism, such as Edward Said, Jacqueline Rose, Frantz Fanon, Hannah Arendt, Gilles Deleuze, Judith Butler, Joseph Mas'ad, Achille Mbembe, Angela Davis, Hamid Dabashi, Audra Simpson, and so many others? Do we ban them all as anti-Semitic? How do we reconcile the smearing of the entirety of academic studies in ethnographic research, political theory, or settler colonial studies? Do we go on censoring indigenous studies or critical race theories? What is the future of academia under these restrictions in freedom to think and freedom to question? Academic theorizations and analysis regarding the foundation of many nation states are replete with critics of their violent foundations based on racialized structures that discriminated and attacked certain ethnic minorities. One advantage Palestinians have over the economic, military, and political powers of the occupier is the moral basis of their cause and struggle. And it is this that brings people across the world in solidarity to stand with the Palestinian cause and to campaign for change. Tarnishing Palestinian resistance as anti-Semitic when critiquing the cruelty of the inflicted occupation is seeking to gain the upper hand for Israel, also on the moral ground. But it is worth noting that countries who have adopted the IHRA are products of settler colonialism, supporters of Israel for their shared colonial foundation and worldview. My final words go back to Shahid and Omar and the many who suffer the pain of the abhorrent smearing campaigns, reminding us that to create change, we need to create tightly knit solidarity networking, so no one is targeted in isolation, and to re-examine our views and actions in the light of that pain. One thing we cannot be is bystanders. In the words of Martin Luther King, every society has its protectors of statu quo and its fraternities of the indifferent who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, all of you, Ebba, for your inspiring words. And I think for your absolute clarion call to action, Ebba, which of course has run through all of these really beautiful presentations. I'm just thinking we have about 5 minutes left, but we're very happy, all of us at the cafe. The cafe can stay open beyond its normal closing hours. That is allowed. So rather than curtail questions and discussion, we're happy to go on till 6 o'clock. I just wanted to pick up on there've been quite a few questions, and Heather has mentioned this, about the IHRA definition, and a very particular one from somebody whose organization is just about to adopt it. So I think I wanted to ask perhaps you, Shahid, whether you've got any ideas about the particular ways in which IHRA, I know you have got ideas because I've read them, but I'd like you to share them if you can, about the ways in which IHRA is used very specifically to silence.
Thank you so much, Gwen, for the question, and thank you, Omar and Hiba, for your contributions. I'm really moved by them. So the IHRA, I mean, it's clear. You only need to know that 7 out of 11 examples that are listed under its definition and, you know, given as an example of anti-Semitism are to do with the Israeli state. So it is really more interested in defending Israeli apartheid, protecting it, than actually defending Jews. It is a political tool. One of its examples clearly states that Israel, calling Israel a racist endeavor, is anti-Semitic. So it's that in itself shows how like they are completely dismissing the Palestinian experience. Zionism is a racist ideology. It's a supremacist ideology that that predicated on the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians and the elimination of the indigenous people of Palestine for Israel to exist. And settler colonialism was the first choice of the Israeli state. And then apartheid came as a second choice in order to maintain and control over the population that remains and keep as maximum of the Palestinians as possible in as minimal land as possible. And then the occupier as well is just absolved of responsibility for the occupied. And so if this is not racism, then what is? And this is long-standing injustice that we have to speak about, and we are victims of it, and we have to speak about it. And so if we leave it to the IHRA definition, then every one of us here is by definition an anti-Semite. And of course we have to reject this. We have to reject this, and we have to reject how this deliberate conflation between Zionism and Judaism for the sake of protecting Israel from accountability. I came as a living example of how the IHRA is actually designed to suppress the Palestinians. My university only adopted that definition in 2020, and the first time it comes 2021 actually, and the first time it becomes effective and it is used against me, against a Palestinian young academic. So it shows very clearly that this is a racially motivated attack against a Palestinian and a silencing, part of the silencing that has targeted the Palestinians for decades. And the IHRA is not the only tool that has been used to criminalize Palestinians. Prevent strategy before that also posed restrictions and censorships on the Palestinians and their allies. I have so many examples about this, but there's probably not enough time to address this. Yes, Israel is an apartheid state, and now we have even the world's leading human rights organization on our side, repeating what we have been saying for decades as Palestinians. And it is.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
Sorry, it is time for accountability. Justice is long overdue, and I just wanted, because of all the amount of thoughts that are rushing in my head, I forgot to mention that Chris Husbands, who's the Vice Chancellor of Sheffield Hallam University, when he was challenged and exposed by the students in the Q&A session, the students mentioned to him that Amnesty International, even Amnesty International, has revealed Israel's real nature. and addressed Israel as an apartheid state and called for accountability. And then Chris Husband's response saying, no, I don't think Israel is an apartheid state. I mean, this is white privilege in expression, and it has to be called as such. Those people, like, they have to understand that this issue is not a matter for debate. They live far from it. They're not under these systems. They don't know what it's like to be a Palestinian. And they don't know the consequences and the material consequences that we have to deal with for just being Palestinians. My case showed that Israeli apartheid would chase us beyond our occupied territories. And they would do anything to drag us down and tarnish our reputation. And so we have to fight back. We have no choice but to fight back. And actually, I truly believe that we have reached that critical mass. We did reach that critical mass, and we are at a good time for Palestine. We have to stay strong, and I'm sure we will see Palestine liberated in our lifetimes.
Thank you so much, Shahad. I'm so glad I didn't, you didn't let me interrupt you. That was worth carrying on with. I just wanted to, there's a few more questions. I think Martin had one, and Bernard Spiegel, I think, is it? Let me just check. Yeah, Bernard Spiegel. So shall I take Martin first and then Bernard, and also, of course, Lama, Heba, and Omar may also want to respond to the same questions. So over to you, Martin.
Just a brief comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The people who are implementing the IHRA, I think, are the people that we need to be kind of engaging with, because I imagine that there's a deep, for many of them, a deep cognitive sort of dissonance. People who've gone into academia, finding themselves closing down on academic freedom. People who've gone into editorial work, finding that they're excluding and censoring people in defense of an apartheid and racist system. I think there must be a kind of deep, I mean, I could talk for some time about sort of ideas about why that's come about and so on. But the IHRA press gangs, doesn't it, civil society, into becoming kind of outposts of the Zionist lobby. You know, the Zionist lobby is able to have its work undertaken by people actually, I think, probably are deeply committed to civil liberties and to anti-racism, or believe themselves to be so committed. And I was, you know, one of the reasons I think why your victory, Shahad, was so moving and important was the sort of sense that these people can be dissuaded from their oppressive, you know, alliance with Zionism. That was it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. I just wondered if Omar or Lama or Hebba would like to add anything to that question.
No, just to clarify just something very briefly, that the IHRA definition does not really cover the most insidious forms of hostility to Jewish people. And the looseness of the definition is liable, in fact, to chill legitimate criticisms of the state of Israel and coverage of human rights abuses against Palestinians. I would also probably add that whether under human rights law or the IHRA definition, political action against Israel is not properly characterized as anti-Semitic unless the action is intended to promote hatred or hostility against Jews in general.
Thank you. Did Omar or did anybody want to add anything to that? So I might move on to Bernard. Bernard, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah. Well, I just wonder whether we, in response to a really well thought out and very effective strategy in attempting to silence Palestinian voices, is that whether we have thought sufficiently about our strategy in a coordinated way, or are we too reactive in general?
I wonder whether maybe would you like to respond to that first, Lama, and then Shahed or Omar or Heba? Which
Well,
one of you?
actually, you know, maybe I'll say briefly, thanks, Eamon, for forwarding the article, which talks about the success of Shahd and what to do, you know, how to, because it was truly, you know, now I'm always really careful when I say success story, it's not easy. You know, I'm sure it wasn't easy for Shahd, but in that article, in fact, I think I printed out some of what they said. Basically, concentrate, making it a collective action, not wait till the next, you know, academic is going to be hit. We need to make it early, you know.
That's right.
You know, like be organized early, not wait for the next person to be attacked. You know,
that's right. I mean, sorry,
yeah.
we've got to be proactive. A word I hate, actually.
Yes.
And take the fight to them. You know, to the source, because we're dealing with the manifestation at the moment, and I just feel there's a whole area that we haven't attacked, and we haven't been coordinated enough. We don't sit back and discuss what a strategy looks like. And I find that worrying. And just finally, from my point of view, now I've floated this point to a number of different people, and it's quite remarkable the absence of response, and that just I find quite worrying.
You know, there's a beautiful article which actually Nadira Shalhoub Kavarkian referred me to, called "Stealing the Pain of Others." And it's really worth reading. You know, it's just, you know, that we sit and look and and then we leave and then we don't do anything. You know, I have been asking myself this: how do we go from outrage to action? But you know, I think it's important to emphasize what was emphasized today, is that we are gaining success. I loved what Shahd said. We are reaching a tipping point. You know.
Yeah, but I think what you're implying and what I'm saying is that there's a gap that needs to be filled in the way we go about things. I mean, just let me just say, I would love to be able to speak to people about this, because I think it's or people, not me, should get together and think about how to proceed in a strategic way. I don't think we need to know what the answer is now. I mean, it's a complicated question.
Thank you. I know that Shahad wants to say something. So over to you, Shahad.
You're muted, Shahad.
No, she's not.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
I was thinking about how important it is to encourage Jews to say, this is not in our name. And you know, like I feel
I can't hear.
As a Palestinian, I feel like I'm expecting solidarity from those who have received oppression, who know what oppression means. And I'm expecting that. It goes without saying, for example, I'm expecting that from people of South Africa, because they've lived apartheid firsthand. I mean, yes, it's a different form of apartheid, in parts even worse than South Africa apartheid that is going in Palestine at the minute, as Desmond Tutu said. But the idea that you know, like people who have suffered oppression would be the people whose solidarity is expected to the people who are currently suffering oppression, and together we are creating the alternative, our collective freedom, actually, because Zionism is trying to colonize the mind as well as the land, and as we mentioned already, Frantz Fanon and Albert Memmi, and how colonialism works both ways. It doesn't only victimize those occupied, but it also turns the occupiers into villains, and you know, like they are also dehumanized in the process of working to sustain their privileges at the expense of our dehumanization and erasure. And that's why, like, I guess anybody, any human being seeing these injustices unfolding in Palestine every day, they need to speak up against it. Silence is complicity, because now you don't have, like, people don't have now the excuse that, oh, we don't have enough information, like what happened in 1948 or in 1967. There was, of course, a historical process that privileged Israeli narrative over ours. And what we are facing with now today are symptoms of this systematic process that that demonized us and actually sided with the Israeli discourse against us. And so we have to counter these and challenge them in every possible way. And I believe that Jews are central in this struggle. We are allies in this struggle, and we need to see each other as allies in this struggle, because Israel is dragging them too, it's affecting them too, and they are inciting anti-Semitism by demonizing us and claiming that, you know, like what is happening, for example, in my campus. One statement that came from a single person at the University of Sheffield, claiming that my reinstatement is making my whole university unsafe for Jews. How is this not seen and addressed and exposed as an incitement of racial hatred and religious and ethnic divisions as well on campus? This cannot be acceptable. But of course, they're losing the grassroots. They're losing on a grassroots level, on a narrative level as well, because they keep also adding to their own exposure to our benefit. So they're even exposing how malicious they are and how they can stoop so low in order to silence Palestinians. And we have been like seeing that in my own example, and many people have seen it. Every Friday, I'm on another appointment with the Jewish Chronicle, and a new revelation, they claim, a new revelation. Once they revealed that I'm a daughter of a convicted terrorist. I've been writing about this for more than 10 years, citing people like Israel Shahak and Felicia Langer, people who have worked alongside the Palestinians to achieve their justice. Israelis who renounced their citizenships after they realized that they could not serve justice to the Palestinians under that apartheid and this discriminatory system, racist system that will never afford humanity to the Palestinians.
I think, thank you. I think that ending with you and your words is the best way to end, even though I think it's very difficult to end, because in the middle of such a flow of eloquence and solidarity, it's difficult.
Could I just interrupt, please? I have a few comments to make. Is that possible?
Well, we are. Sorry, where is that coming from?
It's from David Berry. I have requested twice that I could have some comments.
You didn't specify a question, David, and I'm really sorry, but I think we are at the end of the session now. So if you would like to write to anyone here, that would be absolutely fine. We don't want to silence you, but we are now at 6 o'clock, and you didn't put in the chat the particular question, which was why I didn't take you up. I apologize for that, and please feel free to email us if you have comments to make about the event or any of the talks. I am going to wind up now because we are at 6 o'clock, and I think it's very appropriate that we end with Shahad's words. And I want to thank all of you really warmly for your contributions. To you, Lama, for moderating the discussion with Shahad so beautifully and sensitively. To you, Omar and Heba, for your wonderful contributions, which has opened up the space for solidarity in a way that I think has been inspiring, so that we're talking about a whole range of voices and connections. And then last of all, to you, Shahad, for everything that you've exemplified about, well, I think Lama mentioned moving from outrage to action, which I think is a really important thing for all of us to take away. We shouldn't just be outraged. We actually have to move to doing things. But I also want to say how really moving your presentation was, how emotional it made me feel. And then I think about being moved and being moved to action. And I think for me, that's a massive takeaway point. So you've galvanized us and made us think really about two principles that I think come out of the Palestinian struggle. And one, as we've mentioned, is love. And the other is persistence. If there's anything I learned from my Palestinian colleagues, it's about the need to be persistent. And that's something, again, that you've exemplified with us. So I think we will end now, and many, many thanks to everybody who's participated, and particularly to Lama, Shahad, Omar and Heba. Thank you. And I think we'll just do a big round of applause.
Thank you so much.